Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Emerald Planet. All the ecology news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's your host, Executive Director of the Emerald Planet, Dr. Sam Lee Hancock.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you on a week-to-week basis looking around the globe in 144 different nations, looking for those 1,000 best practices, the technologies, services, and products that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And as we go to a planet of 9 billion people, we're looking at how we're going to increase the quality of life, check climate change, and at the same time bring more environmental quality to the lives of everyone. And the person sitting right beside me has actively been working on that for a number of years and expanding her outreach in that area. This is Robin Nixon. She's the Acting Deputy Superintendent and Chief of Partnerships for the National Mall and Memorial Parks, NAMA, and also the National Park Service. And Robin, welcome.
Thanks, Sam. Nice to be here.
Well, it's always good to see you. We've been working together actually for a number of years now.
We have, about 6 years.
Yes, all the trees that we planted together down on the mall and around these memorial parks. And it's just absolutely marvelous. And I'm going to jump ahead if I can to this first photograph because this is one of our favorite places that we've been working on for a number of years. But tell us a little bit about the vision and the mission as far as the National Mall and the mall and the parks themselves.
You bet. So the National Park Service actually is charged with preserving and protecting America's most special places for this and future generations, for the enjoyment of this and future generations. And the mission is actually expanded to sort of wrap that in a hug of partnerships. So we preserve and protect. We make sure that local communities and visitors have a beautiful place to see and to recreate and relax, and also to engage in demonstrations and other activities and express their views to their government. Yeah,
as democracy, and that's very important. But looking at this photograph, this is the cherry blossom time around the tidal basin.
Yeah.
Of course, the Jefferson Memorial, but you just see thousands of people out here. And this is something that you can go down there in the dead of winter and people are roaming around the mall.
Always.
So this is, as they say, this is the front yard as far as America is concerned. Why did they say that? And how do you prove it to yourself day in and day out in your position?
Well, you know, the National Mall Memorial Parks is actually part of the oldest federal lands in America. The L'Enfant Plan, which designed Washington, actually designed the green space that's included here and which has been largely preserved. So the National Mall and Rock Creek Park and Anacostia Park are all part of the wonderful green space that we get to enjoy every day. So as part of that plan, L'Enfant was very specific in saying that these lands are set aside to commemorate America's heroes and America's history. So the National Mall is sort of the epicenter of where people can come to learn what does it mean to be an American, both now, in the past, and in the future to come. It's also a place where you can toss a Frisbee or have a picnic or celebrate the 4th of July. So it kind of serves as the function of a front yard.
You know,
for everyone.
The whole thing about this, though, you look at this, and we're talking about this, and we're going to talk more about this intersection between nature and the built environment. You really see this, the density as far as Washington, D.C. itself, you know, with, you know, the federal part of this, but then extending out into Washington, D.C. proper. So how do you manage this interaction between all this nature, because we're seeing it here with the trees and the grass and all that, and then just, you know, into, you know, the sunset, all the buildings?
The National Mall, unlike many of our national parks in this country, is right smack in the middle of a city. So we have to have sort of a different perspective. We have to deal with things like acid rain, making the dome of the Jefferson Memorial more porous. So now these tiny little live critters called, what is that called? Biofilm. Has made the marble blacker, but it is a result of being in an intensely used urban environment. On sort of the other side of that, we have a huge community right here to work with every day, to partner with, to make it a better city, right? And not just, or not separately a national park that's a place unto itself to be cared for.
It interacts. And looking at the sign here, we don't normally usually dates, but this is 2016. This was a big momentous occasion.
Big year.
For your organization. So was this a transition into a new movement, a new mission, a new vision, or is it actually looking back and then saying, you know, we're solid as we are, we're going to keep moving forward as America?
It really was a moment of change in looking forward. In that the National Park Service had been, to some degree, somewhat insular, right? We care for the parks, we protect, we preserve. And the director of the National Park Service at that time, John Jarvis, initiated sort of the planning around the centennial to be a new blossoming of engagement. Because we understand, right, that no man is an island, well, no park is an island, right. That you require the engagement of not just your visitors, but your community, and most especially future generations, if we want to sustain these marvelous and in some ways unique to the whole world spaces.
Yeah, I've been in 94 different capital cities, and Washington, D.C. is definitely unique. But the thing about it we don't think about is how this really supports the local community, and the number of people that are from Washington, D.C., live permanently here, actually work with your National Mall and Memorial parks. So how do you engage with the community to make sure that you're getting, you know, enough of the local community to come in and actually, just like this lady here, it's been over 40 years working in this service?
The National Mall and Memorial Parks has actually had a tremendous history of multi-generational employees who help care for the park and help run the park, and may move on to other parks, but unlike many groups of employees, many of our people stay for their whole career. So someone like Alice can be with us for 40 years.
That's absolutely fantastic. And of course, this is the new generation that you're talking about, and I know there's many activities on the mall all the time as far as children are concerned. But looking at these, the memorial parks that you have, I mean, we're talking about parks, there's many of these, and yet it's all woven through the mall itself. How does that work? You have all these different monuments and this huge mall.
It's about 2 miles. If you want to, you know, if you're one of the million joggers or 30 million visitors in a year.
30 million now.
30 million visits.
Yes.
So some of that's double counted,
right.
But we know, of course, from other data from the city that there's probably 20 to 25 million visitors, and the vast majority do come to the National Mall.
That's incredible.
So it's a fine balance of paying attention to the needs of our visitors every day, right? And ensuring there's amenities and places to relax and restrooms and food and everything that a person wants when they're on a vacation or visiting a new place. And at the same time, creating this larger sense of commemoration and respect for people who have served and people who have lost their lives, right? We have a number of military memorials, right. And at the same time celebrate the history of what it means to be an almost 250-year-old democracy.
Yeah, I'll
right?
tell you, it's absolutely exciting. But looking at the Washington Memorial, that really kind of sets the standard as far as what we're looking at on this, the beauty of it, but also the grandeur, and at the same time, the permanence of all this. Mm-hmm. And we talked about this earlier. This is really like managing a small city. And maybe not such a small city at that. Maybe
not such a small city. That's true.
Because it operates, 24/7, 365. People are coming in and out all the time.
Yes.
The door is always open. So how do you manage something like that? Now we're kind of getting in, to the wonky part of this, but it really is important that this all works for these, whether it's 25 or 30 million people are coming in, mm-hmm. duplicated or not. They all expect it to work and the front door to be open.
Yes. We never say get off our lawn.
Uh-huh.
Right. The park itself only closes one day of year, but of course it's not closed. It just means everybody is actually off one day. Mm-hmm. Right? The rest of the time we have hundreds of maintenance workers, we have engineers, we have architects, mm-hmm. we have landscape architects, we have conservators and curators and natural resource managers. I'm sure actually our job's a little different than a typical city manager, mm-hmm. right? Because we have, not too many people have 555-foot freestanding stone structures that they have to make sure are okay through earthquakes and all the other things that can happen. This picture is actually really interesting because one of the strategies that we've used in recent years has been 3D scanning in order to create an archive of the condition of these structures, because the National Park Service is in the forever business. Yeah. Right? We're not just fixing it for today or this week. Our job all the time is to make sure that these iconic structures and memorials are here forever.
Yeah. And looking at this is certainly one of reverence and certainly sad too, but at the same time, how it needs constant care and attention.
It does. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial is actually in some ways, it's not necessarily the most visited, but it's one that in some ways has the most impact on people, right? It's been very known for that since it's opened. So
we're gonna go out on this. We got the people on the lawn, the 100th anniversary. What do you see for the expansion of the activity over the next 5 or 10 or 15 years? About 10 seconds.
Well, we're going to have a new director. We are way into youth and bringing young people in the park to be future stewards.
Robin Nixon, thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Sam.
Great, the Emerald Planet.
Your time is gonna come. Your time is gonna come. It's up to you to reach out to be that friend who comes along. Your day is gonna come.
When you make a friend, you make a difference.
Your day is gonna come.
Friendship, pass it on. A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
Good one, son.
Last summer, my new dad took me on vacation. First, we went deep sea fishing.
Wow! I'm so proud of you, son.
And then we went on Thunder Shark. That was awesome! Let's go again. 3 times. I gotta say, it was pretty cool.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of kids in foster care will take you just as you are.
What's it feel like when a woman's having a heart attack? Chest pain, like there's a ton of weight on your chest. Severe shortness of breath. Unexplained nausea. Cold sweats. There's an unusual tiredness and fatigue. There's unfamiliar dizziness or lightheadedness. Unusual pain in your back, neck, jaw, one or both arms, even your upper stomach are signs you're having a heart attack. Don't make excuses. Make the call to 911 immediately. Learn more at womenshealth.gov/heartattack.
Operation Wonder Park is a go!
There's nothing more powerful than imagination.
Honey, have you seen my cell phone?
But don't just imagine.
My park came to life?
Ooh, a plot twist.
Use STEM to build, create.
She did it.
And change the world.
Who's with me?
I'm more of a 2 feet on the ground kind of guy. Oh, no.
It's gonna
hurt tomorrow.
If she can STEM, so can you. Find out more at She Can STEM.
We're back to the Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello, welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States. And week to week, we're looking for the best practices, what we call the best of the best, the solutions that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And we're looking at the National Mall and Memorial Parks of the National Park Service in Washington, D.C. as a microcosm of the environment, the built environment, the interaction between urban, even some rural areas, and at the same time, how do we not only maintain what we have as a nation, but to enhance, increase, and make better than ever before. And a gentleman sitting right beside me, he's Jeffrey, but he goes by Jeff Curtis. He's a landscape architect of the National Mall and Memorial Parks of the National Park Service. And actually, that's what he's doing. And looking at it, how do we mesh this natural environment and the built environment together? And as you know, Jeff, this is a big question in engineering, architecture, landscape architecture, everything today is how do we do this with a society it's now 80% urban? How do you do that on such a huge mall as part of the National Park Service?
Well, parks, I think, are an essential feature of that interface between the natural and built environment, because people in urban areas, when their best access to green space is our urban parks. And so the National Park Service, but particularly with Washington, D.C., the majority of our parks are federally managed by the National Park Service, so that provides a great opportunity.
Yeah, looking at this photograph, of course, we're seeing the Capitol, and we're seeing many of the federal buildings. But when you look out into the expanse of this photograph, you're seeing really urban architecture and the built environment. So how would you define what we mean by built environment? And then how do we keep this green space that we see right in the center, which is actually just leading off into just a mass of buildings?
So the built environment, of course, is obviously the buildings, the concrete, the structures, and then the National Mall was set aside and designated as green space. So what we have is mostly trees and grass, and then there's a few odd buildings in a way as the memorials, but it's still a very large urban canopy. And then we have the National Mall, we have Rock Creek Park, and there's a lot of land set aside and designated and protected to be maintained as green space.
But we move right into this. Now, how do we get something that's this densely built? And of course, now more and more of these buildings are actually having green roofs, and so we're actually, vertically going up to green space. But how do we take what we just saw as far as, this lane that's going into this massive built environment? You're a landscape architect.
Right.
When you look at this, how did we get here from where we've been?
Well, I think with DC, I think we had a unique situation where that's where it was originally started. In the L'Enfant plan, the parks were designed into the fabric of the city as far as having existing urban environment and then moving towards a greener space, which is, I think, what you're asking me. I think that's a more complicated issue. I think probably including more green infrastructure and understanding that these hard urban landscapes are not as resilient as having as natural landscape that can absorb and provide a bunch of different environmental benefits.
Now, looking at the original plan, this is going to this green space that we're just talking about, and we're going to get into some of the work that you're actually doing in these days. This was really visionary as far as building a city that would actually incorporated all this green space, instead of just having like the old cities in Asia or Europe, places like that was just totally built out and virtually no green space whatsoever. Of course, when you go there, you still see the remnants of that. So Washington, D.C. was actually conceived as a green city, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So looking at this, what we have in here, how have we been able to protect that over all these generations?
I think it's mainly been through the efforts of the National Park Service and our work as just our history of a country with our national park system, and at the turn of the 19th century when the frontier was closing and we were suddenly realizing that opportunities for green space were diminishing. So it was Teddy Roosevelt started this big federal land grab to help preserve and set aside land, and then the National Mall became a part of that, along with millions of other acres.
Yeah. So this is something, of course, now we're looking at some of the work that you have, that you're actually trying to expand or enhance some of this through bicycle trails and other things. Although this is a rendering of that, it seems like it's quite complicated when you're trying to mesh, this new, or more people are bicycling to work, fewer cars on the streets, at least that's the ideal, and enhance the green space.
Right, yeah, so this is a plan of a bike trail that was redesigned. This is actually one of the most heavily used commuter routes for bicycles into the city. It's just past the 14th Street Bridge. And the original trail was narrow. It was kind of falling off the side of a hill. And so we widened it, added a bike lane, and also reduced the grade to make it easier to go up and down, just to increase the overall accessibility for bikes into the city.
Yeah. So the demand then is for more and more green space, more and more exercise areas, more and more interaction with nature. Is that what you're seeing in your work with the National Park Service?
Definitely. More accessibility for bikes, more green space, improving our infrastructure to support the green space and alternative modes of transportation that is more than just cars.
People see this and they may say, why are we doing all this? What's the investment in it? And we're not talking about dollars and cents and all this, but what's the mindset, the psychology as far as creating more of this and trying to enhance, in other words, more trees being planted? In other words, like the Washington, D.C. now with their River Smart program, they're actually giving trees away and encouraging people to plant more trees. And that's what you're doing. So how does this juxtaposition of people that are coming here to visit, at the same time people that live here are really demanding more green space?
Well, the park and the National Mall and the memorial parks around the mall are by far like the main tourist attraction that people come here to DC. So just in terms of visitors and drawing people here, that's a main economic driver. In terms of people who aren't tourists, there's a huge demand for like the benefits that trees and parks provide, from being able to go out to exercise to carbon sequestration to stormwater management. All of these things play an essential role to a city.
Yeah, and this is what you're talking about, and in a sense, this is kind of like a huge green sump that we're looking at. One is, what is a green sump? And then secondly is that we see all these trees and yet all this, wide open grass area. More and more they're saying we want more trees, less grass. So how do you have that as the landscape architect meet that delicate balance of where you're meeting the needs of this huge public? And I think we're hearing maybe 20 to 30 million people coming in to use this space, and not just kill it, overwhelm it, but at the same time to keep it as a living environment for people to visit.
Right, so it's a challenge. I mean, we're always planting trees as they die. It's also challenging on the mall because we have a cultural landscape obligation to maintain the way that it was designed by different landscape architects over the years.
Yeah, so the whole thing about it then is that we're really trying to, and this is really in our theme, we're trying to protect history, at the same time be very progressive, and meet the needs of a 21st century that's facing advancing climate change and increased rainstorms and heat and all these other kinds of things. So do you think we're getting that good balance? Do we have that balance of what we need and going back to the very first design of the city to do this and address these issues?
I think preserving history is a very important part of what we do, but as time goes on, we'll have to look towards the future and maybe make some changes, like for example with Dutch elm disease and the historic need for us to have elms throughout the mall. I think it's going to be harder and harder for us to maintain things like that in the future. So.
Now, looking at transportation, we rank, 1 or 2 depending on, what year it is, with Los Angeles, New York, as far as the traffic jams and gridlock and all these other kinds of things. And yet, we're still very, very sensitive, just looking at these bridges going across the Potomac River, very sensitive about the history of, again, our built environment. How do we take something that's very classical and then morph that into something that's going to be very useful and more maybe pliable in the future to allow for more people? Because if we're getting 20 to 30 million people now, it's going to be more in the future. How do we do that, Jeff?
How do we have more people?
No, how do we take care of more people?
How do we take care of more people,
whether we want them or not?
Yes. I definitely preserving our parks and green spaces, hopefully increasing that area. Like I know DC is doing a lot to increase the canopy, to plant more trees, to change all these hard surfaces into green spaces, like converting to green roofs, better stormwater management with rain gardens and curb cutouts and permeable pavements. So I don't. So
no, that's
I don't
a
know.
perfect. No, you've answered it, because we're looking at the place where they're actually trying to do that. And a lot of these buildings that we're looking at, if you look at the future plan of this area to our left, looking into this is all going to be totally restructured.
Right.
It's going to be several hundred acres that are going to be redone, green roofs, more trees, and all these other kinds of things. So we're just about out of time. What do you see for, and again, about 20 seconds worth, if you don't mind, of how we're going to accommodate new people, but the environment?
More opportunities for non-vehicular commuting, increasing increasing access to moving out of the cars, reducing the city's footprint, and I think,
as we create the Emerald Planet.
This is the story of a boy who is very sensitive to lights and sounds. So he built secret hiding places where nothing could get in. The boy didn't like looking people in the eye. It made him feel uncomfortable. One day, he found out he had something called autism. His family got him help, and slowly, he learned how to live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.
What do you think you're doing, Kevin?
Was just gonna drive home.
There are several warning signs present that you shouldn't be driving.
Like hearing voices?
Like your text-to-emoji ratio?
Oh man, the selfies. Selfie, nailed it.
We all have warning signs that let us know that we're probably not okay to drive. Mine is pretending to be your subconscious.
Craig, come on man, let's split a ride home.
Being a dad is an adventure full of special moments.
A cruise?
Right.
Unexpected moments.
I got this.
And even awkward moments.
Okay, Dad, thank you.
But every moment you spend with your kids, even the smallest moments, can make the biggest impact on your child's life. So take a moment to be a dad today.
So, I'm kind of new here, but I've noticed a trend. My human does this funny thing where she goes around and gets all my toys, and then she hides them in that basket by the door. But it's always the same basket, and it's always in the same place. And then she acts so surprised when I find them, but, she's putting them in the same basket. Again. It's like, hello, that's where you put it last time. You were the worst at hide and go seek.
It's involved in GIS and mapping, which is very important. And she's actually looking beyond the horizon, figuratively and literally, at the same time. This is Hannah Dean. She's the Geographic Information Systems and Mapping Department over at the National Mall and Memorial Parks of the National Park Service. And Hannah, welcome.
Hi, thanks.
And thank you for being here. And how I know about you and what you're doing is that we've been planting, hundreds of trees through our Rotary Club in conjunction with your National Mall and Memorial Parks for going on 30 years now. And so we want to find out where all these trees are because we're dedicating them in the name of our speakers.
Yep.
And you're the person doing that.
Yep.
So tell us, what is GIS? What does that actually stand for? And why is it so important to have someone like you with such advanced technical skills in the heavens, down to earth, trying to find out, what's going on and what do we need to be looking at for the future?
Yep. So GIS is Geographic Information Systems. It's a method of maintaining data, mapping data. So we take points on every trees, and it's important to have somebody like me in a park because we kind of maintain continuity between data sets taken, inventories taken throughout as staff changes throughout time. So it's part of my job to try to integrate inventories that were taken in 2003 and 2004 by one of my predecessors, and then combine that with data sets that we take ourselves in the field, and also those taken by our partners like Casey Trees. So they do a lot of inventorying throughout the park. They're a great partner. So that allows us to track trees, ultimately like the ones donated by the Rotary Club, and make sure that we are able to show that on a map and say these are representative of your contributions.
Yeah, but looking at this, and we have this schematic here, and this is the area around all the different parks, and we're going to talk about why this is important, what all these colors means. But this is very complicated as far as this interaction again between nature and the built environment. And it seems like what you're trying to do is you're trying to blend these so it's not an either or it's in conflict, but you're doing this so that actually it's a blend, and so that humankind, has jobs, be able to get to and work, they can shop and do all these things, but yet have a healthy environment. So looking at this, how do you use your skill sets and your advanced tools to make sure that, again, we're in this blended situation and not in conflict?
Yeah, that's a good point. Part of the value of having tree data is that we can map out the trees and then overlay other aspects of the built environment, like things like benches or paths or other areas that are heavily used, and make sure that the trees in heavily used areas are safe. So part of what I do is provide that tree data and that overlay of built areas and social uses to folks like our tree crew, and then they use that data to make sure that they're paying special attention to trees in highly trafficked areas and making sure that they are pruned well. And that way, because we have a limited number of resources, we can focus those resources in areas where folks are using the built environment and make sure that the trees don't pose a danger and that they're well maintained in those areas.
Now, looking at this schematic here, this is a Potomac River, and we're going to let you describe what we're looking at. But again, you're actually highlighting almost every single tree that's in there, and at the same time as how this tree and this somewhat forested area is interacting with humans.
Yep.
At the same time, how humans are interacting with this green space.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're looking at this, how should we as citizens or the public be looking at this? Or do we just leave it to someone like yourself that's, you know, really doing the analysis and trying to figure out what is best for humankind as well as nature?
Yeah, it's actually, visitors can do a lot to make sure that those trees stay healthy. So mapping the trees includes taking information like the diameter and the drip line, critical root zones, and so being able to map that and convey that to the public is useful because that way people can understand, well, it's not just the tree, the trunk of the tree, it actually matters how we treat that space around the tree and the turf around the tree. So compaction and other things that happen when folks use that area around the tree can actually harm the tree. So gathering that data and trying to convey that to the public can often help educate folks about how they should behave around trees. So.
Now looking at this, all this blue area, what is this blue area and how does that relate to the parks and making sure that it's vibrant, it's alive, and actually it's providing the environmental impacts at the same time it's being able to protect itself?
So all those blue dots on the map represent tree sites that we've inventoried through time. And in 2003 and 2004, a partnership with Casey Trees allowed our park to inventory about almost 20,000 trees across our park. So for every single site you see up there, they collected information on the soil type and the condition, and that kind of tells us how a tree would do in that spot. So. And then as moving through time, Casey Trees continued to take inventory, so we have more up-to-date inventories, the most recent from 2018. And maintaining information on each of those tree sites, what's going on, allows us to understand the health of the tree and also allows us to identify missing trees in the landscape. And so places where we can plant new trees and use partnerships to gather donations and fill in that canopy.
But looking at this, people don't realize the mall is only 3 feet above sea level. And maybe, 100 some miles in from the Atlantic Ocean and off the Chesapeake Bay.
Yep.
But this is a very environmentally sensitive area. At the same time, it's critical as far as the protection of humankind, as climate change becomes more and more pronounced, sea level rise and all that. But we're looking at this flood zone. This is something that people don't think of the mall and as a major flood zone.
Yep.
So what is this map telling us here, and what do we need to be conscious of as a people and as a government to make sure we're protecting this very precious natural resource?
Yeah, so this was an example map that the tree crew supervisor asked to put together to kind of understand some of the threats that could that storm surges could pose to, especially the trees along the basin, the cherry trees. So like overlaying the built environment, overlaying things like storm surge and sea level rise can inform how, like species of trees and the type of care that certain areas need in order to keep those trees healthy.
Yeah, this is just incredible. Look at that, as far as the trees that we have and looking at the importance of this whole area, because this is really a very precious natural resource that we have, not only for Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland, but actually for the whole nation because the people that come and visit here. So moving into this, and we're going to be running out of time here, but looking at this natural environment, how do you, as through your GIS and your mapping, make sure that we are planning 5, 10, 15, maybe even 50 years ahead to protect these resources, and then thinking back to the floodplain, the flood zones, and all that?
Well, I'm mainly, and my job is mainly just to maintain the data. So I work closely with Jeff Curtis and our tree supervisor and folks on the ground to provide them the information they need to maintain the landscape. But maintaining that data set is very important because otherwise we can't distribute our resources efficiently, and so that's my
it's
focus.
maximizing. But
yeah.
you know, you're talking about maintaining this data set, but actually you're very aggressively going after trying to improve the data set and adding to that.
Yeah.
So how do we get beyond this, and I'm going to leave this up for just a minute, how do we get beyond this maintaining to where we really are proactively going at this information that in many ways, even though we have history, you know, climate change, everything, the dynamics of the weather now is very different than what we've had over the last 50, 100, even 200 to 300 years.
Yep. Yeah, so we're actively inventorying trees as well. So like Casey Trees, park staff go out and measure trees and assess the condition, assess what kind of improvements are needed in things like hardware, like cabling of the elm trees on the mall, and also what kind of species might be good replacements for species that are impacted by climate change.
So what we're seeing here, this is really very much hands-on as far as what's going on, even though you're using computers and you know, satellites and all these other things, just like this gentleman here in the dead of winter.
Yeah.
I mean, you're out and of course we're trying to plant more trees all the time as well.
Right.
So what do you see for the future as far as GIS and mapping for the future? Where are we going?
I think hopefully we're going to be able to make more mapping products available to the public and available to our partners so that we can showcase your contributions and also hopefully inform the type of species that we can plant so that we maintain a healthy canopy.
Okay, that's very important. The whole thing is that the city wants to be 40% under canopy, which is all part of what you're doing.
Yep.
So thank you for being with us. And
Thanks.
thank you for looking at this as we create the Emerald Planet.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. Already posted it.
See how fast this moves?
Yeah, that's a good thing, I think. What'd you have for breakfast? What'd you have for breakfast? Oh, what did I have for breakfast? We didn't have breakfast.
I got a crick in my neck, limp in my step, cramping in my muscles every time I try to flex. But if you throw me love, I'll throw you some more.
It's a big responsibility.
Oh, it's huge. I know, it's huge.
And the salary.
Oh my god, yes. I mean,
Right?
like, I was about to move in with my parents, and right before, so this saved me.
I really believe in you, you know?
Thank you. It's nice to hear that from someone.
These are cool. Did you, what did
We're back to the Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you on a week-to-week basis from Washington, D.C. and the United States, looking around the globe in 144 different nations, looking for those 1,000 best practices, technologies, services, products, and the people, of course, that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. I'm Dr. Sam Hancock of Emerald Planet, the Emerald Planet TV, and we're constantly looking at this interaction between the built environment, modern urban society, and nature. And how do we protect both, actually, as we do need to have the built environment for a population now. It's almost 320 million people. The planet is about 7.5 billion people and going to about 9 billion. And I have a gentleman sitting right beside me that's going to talk a little bit about, in a very kind of down-home, folksy, relaxed review of what is called witness trees. And it's a phenomenal idea where you have these very sophisticated, we just talked about GIS and spatial mapping and all these other things, and yet at the same time, what you're doing is you're trying to find these legacy trees, if I can use that term, that may have impact for the environment for future generations. And we're looking at one of those right now. This is this Jefferson elm tree. Now, why is this so important? And we're going to go through a number of these. There's about 22 of these types of witnesses trees. And what's important about that?
Well, I think that witness trees are a symbol. They're a symbol of the passage of time, and they connect us, the past with the present and the future. And we have a program here in the National Capital Region called this Historic American Landscape Survey, and a pilot program called the Witness Tree Protection Program. And about 22 trees, as you mentioned, are listed in that program, and the Jefferson elm is one of them. And a witness tree, now there are different definitions for a witness tree. If we go back in American history, we can find definitions that have to do with land surveys. This is a little bit different. This has more to do with a direct connection to cultural events. And so these are trees, if you think of going into a park and looking up at a big, beautiful 200-year-old tree and just having that experience maybe in nature of asking yourself and letting your imagination run about what has this tree seen in its time. And we're very fortunate on the National Mall that we have these trees that have seen a lot of history. The Jefferson elm is important because there's also a biological and a genetic component to some of these trees. This is a tree, and I don't want to lead you astray here. It is not named, although Thomas Jefferson was a horticulturalist, an amateur, and he loved to, to deal with lots of different species of plants. He didn't really breed trees very much. But this particular one is just north of the Freer Gallery, and it's on Jefferson Drive. And one of the things that was discovered is that this tree is resistant to Dutch elm disease. And I think, as Jeff, our landscape architect, probably mentioned to you, one of the things that is important is diversity in the gene pool. It makes the ecosystem of the National Mall more resilient to disturbance.
Now, looking at the Rock Creek Park and the Potomac Parkway trees, this is more looks more like a jumble, but yet it's very important. So why are we having such diversity as far as the trees, and how does that add to, one, the gene pool, but secondly, at the same time, to protect the environment?
If you think of how disease and blight can wipe out an entire species of trees, take for instance the American elm when the Dutch elm disease comes in the early 1900s from Asia. And so we have these beautiful elm trees that are used in parks throughout North America. Frederick Law Olmsted, who is one of the architects of the Macmillan Plan when they changed the nature of the National Mall in about 1901 to 1910, is very much a fan of these trees. And so the trees are planted beautifully along the elm walks on either side of the reflecting pool, leading up to the Lincoln Memorial. And I hope everybody is going to come down and walk under these beautiful trees. And by the way, as you're walking under the trees, think about maybe Dr. King speaking on those steps in 1963, or Marian Anderson. Those trees are there, and they're witnessing those events. But I think the importance of the diversity is that it is it inhibits some of the vectors of disease that might come in and rob us of some of that beautiful biologic diversity that is so important in our parks.
Yeah, and look at this beautiful tree. This is literally right in downtown Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And so, again, going to this diversity, but also the uses are quite different. You know, from along the parkway to something downtown, which is almost a center point as far as beauty, comfort, relaxation, as people are moving between jobs, between work, and all that.
I like to think that you know, we talk a lot today about, you know, taking CO2 out of the atmosphere and relieving stress and getting out of the urban chaos into these beautiful parks. But if you go back and you look at Pierre L'Enfant in 1791, and they didn't have this data. And yet, here they are bringing nature into the city. And I think there is a much more fundamental thing going on here, which is for all of us, when, you know, we tend to live our lives in these boxes, and we go day to day in our survival and our workday world. When you come out to a park, you are confronted with nature in the raw. You're going to be looking up at a tree, and all of a sudden you're in a bigger universe. You're connected with the Big Bang. And I think William Blake was the poet that said, to see a world in a grain of sand. That happens in our parks. That's one of the magical things. And I think if we look closely, we can go back and look at Jefferson and Washington and L'Enfant and all the way down through the history of the National Mall. We're going to see these men may not have stated that that was part of their goal, but on some level they knew that that would be a benefit.
Yeah, and just looking at, you know, this Monroe Park, I mean, it's amazing how you can be in such a densely packed urban environment, and yet you just walk up to this tree and you've almost been transposed into a huge forest.
Yeah,
and so it's the psychology of all this, and I think that's what you're sharing, because you're the park ranger and you're the one that's telling these stories. But looking at this, how does this allow us as humans to improve the quality of our own lives by just the fact that we can transport ourselves literally just walking down this path?
I think it helps us to maybe push the envelope of our human experience a little bit, and to maybe there's an inherent egalitarianism in nature, and I think the designers understood this. When L'Enfant is designing the National Mall, he is making these broad open boulevards lined with trees, and it's a form of public democracy, and they understand at some level that people are going to be coming with all kinds of life experiences, different realities to their day-to-day life, but when we all come together in these public spaces, in nature, we are suddenly all just human beings, and we're experiencing something together, and it's our commonality. It unites us. It is, you know, it's a very American thing for our parks, as Theodore Roosevelt would have reminded us, but it's also worldwide. Everybody.
Now, looking at this Frederick Douglass white oak, I mean, it's a stump.
Yeah.
And people say, why are we protecting a stump? You know, and in many cases we just want to, you know, uproot it, put it somewhere else. But yet we're seeing it as the national park, as the National Mall, as this is a very precious piece of history.
Yes.
And yet again, it's this mental as well as the physical transportation back in time, but also to project into the future.
I think you're making a very good point that, you know, if it looks like a stump, but if you look at it long enough, it's almost a time machine. It's taking us back to Frederick Douglass's home. It's showing us his life here in the outskirts of Washington, D.C., looking down from the hill there where his home is. And it's also taking us forward into the vision that Douglass had for the kind of America that he was speaking of and looking at, where he is talking about suffrage for women, where he is a friend to Abraham Lincoln, and he's you know, a critical friend sometimes, but also pushing us along as a country.
So this stump is important, that we not forget these virtues and these values of the past, because sometimes we get in the heat of modern day society and the fast pace, and we kind of forget this classical nature of what America really is all about.
I agree with you. I think that's...
So, but looking at these boxwoods, we're going to show a few more of these the scenes as we go out of here. But what do we see for the future as far as protecting these very obscure in some ways, but yet very necessary national assets and treasures for our future of America?
I'm an interpreter, and interpreters, we have brilliant science folks, and the science folks have some good solutions to the technical issues. We in the interpretation field always like to ask the question, why? And I think in the Park Service we use this word stewardship a lot. And if you think of a park like the National Mall, 25 million per year, 200,000 tour buses coming through, more visitors than Yellowstone, Yosemite, and Grand Canyon combined in a given year.
It's amazing.
We have environmental challenges. We have compacted soil. We have we're on the floodplain of a major river. Some of the trees get damaged. Not all of the visitors who come to the National Mall, everybody is of course welcome, and this is America's parks. These are everyone's parks. But we have to also face reality that not all our visitors are coming with a leave no trace ethic. They may not even know what that means. They may not even know that they're in a national park. So it's important that they be able to find themselves in those parks. And probably the best way to do that is to get out there and go to the park, stand under those trees, and let the park get into your soul.
Let it bear witness,
yes.
Right? Yes. This is Bob Herden. He's a park ranger, National Mall and Memorial Parks, as we look around the globe to create the Emerald Planet.
Thanks.
Thank you for being here.